I am Sylara Denton, 68 years old, and I have spent most of my life teaching other people's children how to find meaning in words that rarely told the truth. I thought I knew how language could wound until my own daughter used it as a blade. The wedding was in a grand old Charleston hotel, all marble light and polished history. I arrived early, careful not to draw attention. My dress was deep teal, quiet against the shimmer of silver and ivory around me. I carried a small gift bag, linen napkins embroidered by hand, and told myself it was enough. Near the entrance stood a polished oak chart covered in delicate cards. Guests leaned in, laughing as they found their names. I scanned the rows for mine Denton. Sylara, it wasn't there. I checked again, slower this time. Still nothing. An usher in a dark vest approached. "May I help you, ma'am?" His voice was courteous, uncertain. "My seat," I said softly. "It seems to be missing." He frowned, checked his clipboard, and then looked at me with the kind of pity that makes you feel smaller than a mistake. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no seat listed for you." I thought he must be wrong. But then I saw her, Thessaly gliding toward us, white silk catching the light. Her smile froze when she met my eyes. "Mom," she said under her breath, as if the word itself were risky. "You can stand by the door. You don't deserve a seat up front." The sound of her voice smooth, practiced, final cut cleaner than any shout could have. Around us, guests laughed at something else entirely, and the sound shattered inside my chest like glass dropped on tile. I nodded once, because there was nothing else to do. I would not give her a scene to remember. I steadied my hands against the gift bag, the embroidered napkins pressing like a pulse between my fingers. It struck me then her words weren't a mistake. They were the conclusion to years of quiet dismissals and careful silences. And standing there at the edge of her celebration, I understood something I had tried not to see. My daughter hadn't left me out by accident. She had been leaving me for years. I turned away before the music began, the scent of lilies following me toward the door. The envelope came on a Tuesday, thin and elegant, with my name printed in gold lettering that looked almost embarrassed to be there. The return address said Ames Denton Wedding, not Thessaly, not even a line in her handwriting. I turned it over in my hands, feeling how light it was. No note, no warmth, just instructions about time, attire, and venue. I waited a full day before calling her. When she answered, her voice was smooth, efficient, the kind she used with clients. "Thessaly, it's me. I know. Mom," she said. "Is everything all right? I received your invitation. It's beautiful. I just wondered, will there be a dinner after the ceremony?" A pause long enough to curdle something inside me. "It's a small event. Just close family and people who fit." Her tone was deliberate, gentle in the way a scalpel is gentle before it cuts. "I see," I said quietly. "Then I'll make sure not to take up space." "Mom, don't start," she murmured. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is," I replied, though I didn't know if I meant it for her or for myself. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching the river shift colors with the afternoon light. The air smelled like salt and pine, the way it always did when storms waited somewhere offshore. I thought about the day Bram left 20 years of marriage folded into a single suitcase. Thessaly had been 15 then, old enough to blame someone but too young to know who. Bram's words still rang in my memory. "Don't make her choose between us. Sylara, she'll always pick me if you force it." He had been right in the cruelest way. A few days later, I saw him again for the first time in years. I was at the tailor's, standing before the mirror in my half-pinned dress, when his car slowed outside. He looked in, his face older, thinner, then pressed the accelerator. Not a wave, not even a nod. I told the tailor to make the hem longer. It felt like the only thing left I could control. The tailor's shop smelled of starch and faint perfume, the kind that lingers after too many fittings. I stood on the small wooden platform while Mrs. Hahn, a quiet woman with careful hands, adjusted the hem of my dress. "It's a beautiful color," she said softly. "Teal suits dignity." I smiled at that word, dignity. Not beauty, not charm, just something that doesn't need permission. "It's simple enough," I told her. "I don't want to outshine the bride." She gave me a sympathetic glance that said she understood more than she could ask. When she finished, I met Nora outside. She had driven me there even though she disliked parking downtown. She was one of those friends who always said the thing everyone else swallowed. "Still going?" she asked. "I am," I said. Nora crossed her arms. "If they treat you like furniture, don't stand in the room." I laughed quietly. "It's my daughter's day. I'll show up right." She shook her head. "Showing up right doesn't mean letting them walk over you." "I know," I said, but we both knew I didn't. That night, I laid the teal dress across my bed. The fabric shimmered faintly in the lamplight, modest, elegant, unthreatening. I ran my fingers along the seams, remembering other dresses, other efforts to fit in. When Thessaly was 15, I'd sewn her a dress for a school banquet. Pale rose, hand-stitched lace on the sleeves. She wore it only long enough for a photograph before changing into a store-bought one she'd borrowed from a friend. "I can't wear something homemade, Mom," she'd whispered, mortified. I told her it was fine. I even smiled while she left the room. Carrying someone else's version of pride. After dinner, I went into the garage to look for the box where I'd stored old fabrics. I found the wooden chair, instead the one I'd refinished for her when she was 10, for her reading corner by the window. Its paint was chipped, one leg loose, a thin layer of dust over the carved initials I'd etched on the back, TD. I wiped the dust away with my sleeve, then left it as it was. Some things don't need fixing twice. The music began before I found where to stand. A violin sang somewhere beyond the doors, followed by the soft hum of conversation that rises just before beauty presents itself. I stayed near the entrance, beside a row of folded coats and a potted fern that had seen better days. From there, I could glimpse the aisle through the crack between the doors. The guests rose, their applause like a tide, and then I saw her Thessaly, my daughter, walking slowly down the aisle on Bram's arm. Her dress shimmered like light on glass. He looked proud, older but composed. She looked untouchable. Two bridesmaids lingered near me, whispering, "That's her, right, the mother." They didn't seat, one said. The other giggled. Apparently she wasn't even supposed to come. They didn't lower their voices enough. My throat burned, but I didn't move. When Thessaly reached the front, she turned for a photograph, and for a single heartbeat, our eyes met through the half-open door. She held my gaze just long enough to make it sting, then turned away. When the vows ended, she came down the aisle again, radiant, and applauded. I stepped back into the hallway, thinking maybe she'd stop, maybe she'd notice. Instead, she paused at the door, leaned close, and whispered so only I could hear, "You are nothing." The words landed quietly, cleanly, as if rehearsed. I felt the air leave my chest. For a moment, I thought of all the times I'd defended her, even from her own cruelty. Then I looked at her face, perfect, triumphant, and I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was confirmation. I set the small gift bag on a side table near the coats. Inside were the embroidered napkins I'd made, each one stitched with her initials. I adjusted my scarf, smoothed the front of my dress, and turned toward the doors. Behind me, applause swelled again. The violin resumed its careful melody. Cameras flashed, capturing a joy that no longer included me. I walked out into the light, steady and silent, leaving the music to play for those who wanted it. I didn't hear the doors close behind me, only the muffled applause that followed. As if the celebration had swallowed the sound of my leaving, the garden air was heavy with jasmine and sea salt. I breathed it in and kept walking, one careful step after another, until my heels sank into the soft path. Behind me, a voice spoke low but certain. "Excuse me, where did the bride's mother go?" I turned slightly. A tall woman stood by the ballroom doors, her posture poised yet restless. Silver hair swept neatly back, gown of soft gray that shimmered only when she moved. I didn't know her then, not by name. But later I would learn Leora Ames, Corin's mother. The young wedding planner hesitated, clipboard trembling. She stepped out. "Ma'am," Leora's tone sharpened just enough to slice the air. "Stepped out." During her own daughter's ceremony, the planner looked down, cheeks coloring. There was a misunderstanding. Leora studied her for a long, silent beat, then said quietly, "A family's treatment of its elders says everything." She turned her gaze toward the doorway, catching sight of me for an instant before I rounded the corner. I kept moving, pretending not to notice, though something in her voice stayed with me, a steadiness, almost protective. Inside, the laughter resumed. I could still hear it faintly as I reached the gate. The sound of glasses clinking, the rehearsal of happiness continuing on cue. Later, I would learn that Leora hadn't returned to her table immediately. She lingered near the corridor, watching the crowd. Two bridesmaids drifted past, their whispers poorly contained. "She really left." "Did you see her face?" one said, half laughing. The other replied, "Can you blame her? The bride told everyone the woman wasn't invited, just showed up." Leora's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened around the stem of her champagne glass. She turned toward the ballroom again, eyes narrowing on the bright swirl of guests and one smiling bride. That was the moment the celebration began to shift quietly, invisibly, because someone finally saw what no one else wanted to see. I was already gone when the pictures started to circulate. But later I learned how the night turned. Inside the reception hall, laughter bubbled over champagne. The music had shifted from violins to a livelier rhythm, the kind that forces everyone to pretend comfort. Near the floral arch, two bridesmaids leaned close, their voices just loud enough to betray confidence. "Look at this one," one of them whispered, waving her phone. "She actually texted this last night. Once I sign, I own the keys." The other laughed, half shocked, half pleased. "She means Corin, right? Of course she does. And his family." Can you imagine a nearby stylist, a woman hired to handle last-minute touch-ups, froze mid-step? She had spent hours pinning curls and smoothing veils, overhearing plenty but never this kind of venom. Her eyes flicked toward the screen. The messages were there, Thessaly's name above the words. Her tone unmistakable. The stylist swallowed, then walked away as the bridesmaids kept laughing. By the bar, she found Leora Ames. "Mrs. Ames," she said softly, "I think you should see something." Leora studied her face before taking the phone. The screen glowed with a chain of messages, Thessaly mocking Corin's quiet manners, calling Leora a controlling relic, and ending with, "Once I sign, I own the keys." He's too eager to prove he's not his father. Leora's hand trembled only once before she steadied it. "Can you send these to me?" The stylist nodded. "I have them saved from the shared album. I thought you'd want to know." When Leora turned to find her son, her movements were slow, deliberate. Corin stood at the edge of the dance floor, smiling politely at guests who had no idea his life was about to split in two. She touched his arm. "Corin, may I speak with you?" He followed her to a quiet corner. She showed him the phone. His smile disappeared first, then his color. He read each line twice, as if hoping the words would rearrange into something innocent. "Finally," he whispered. "Some people think love is a contract, not a promise." And that was the moment the wedding stopped being a celebration and became evidence. They told me later how it unfolded that moment behind the ballroom, where the laughter stopped being real. Leora led them into the private lounge, its door shutting softly behind her. Corin followed, his expression unreadable. Bram was already inside. Summoned by a discreet staff member who had sensed something wrong, Thessaly arrived last, veil askew, irritation flickering across her perfect posture. "What is this?" she demanded. "People are waiting." Leora didn't answer. She set her phone on the table between them, the screen still lit. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Corin's voice was low. "Read it." Thessaly glanced down. The glow of the screen lit her face as the words appeared, her own messages. Her jaw tightened. "That's out of context," she said quickly. "They're jokes. You can't take everything literally." "Jokes," Leora repeated, calm but edged, "calling me a relic. Saying my son is a set of keys you'll own. That's humor to you." Thessaly's smile trembled. "You're twisting this. Everyone vents. You've never said something unkind when you were stressed." Corin looked at her, eyes hollow. "Not about the person I plan to marry." She turned to Bram then, reaching for a familiar ally. "Dad, tell them this is ridiculous." "Tell them." For the first time in years, his voice didn't bend. "Did you humiliate your mother too? Or was that in context as well?" The room went still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Thessaly's mouth opened, then closed. She's fine. She left before she left." Bram interrupted. "Because you told her she didn't deserve to be seen." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of years swallowed whole. Leora's gaze softened, not for Thessaly, but for what decency still remained in the room. "A woman who can shame her mother doesn't understand marriage," she said quietly. Thessaly looked around, seeking rescue. Finding none, the music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the wall, bright, unknowing. And though I wasn't there, they said it felt as if I was the empty space where I should have stood pressing in around them, louder than any voice could be. They said the silence after my name was mentioned was the kind that folds the air in half. Thessaly stood near the table, hands shaking, her eyes moving from face to face as if searching for the version of the night she'd meant to have. The glow from Leora's phone dimmed on the table, the screen still open on her words. "This is insane," Thessaly said finally. "You're twisting everything I said. You're all turning against me because of her." Her Bram's voice cracked through the stillness. "You mean your mother?" Thessaly blinked, startled. She wasn't used to him interrupting. Not when it concerned her. He stepped forward, slow but certain. "You humiliated the only person who ever stood by you," he said. "Your mother raised you alone. She paid for your school, your first car, every apartment deposit when I wouldn't. She never said a word against you, not once. And you told her she didn't deserve a seat." "She exaggerates everything," Thessaly whispered. Bram's jaw tightened. "No, Thessaly, she never exaggerated." "I did. I pretended your behavior was fine because I couldn't stand to face what I'd created." Corin stood beside him, ring still on his finger, gaze fixed on the floor. "She didn't just humiliate her mother," he said quietly. "She humiliated all of us." Thessaly turned to him, panic rising. "You're not seriously taking their side. You know how people gossip. You know how this will look." Corin met her eyes. "It already looks worse than you think." He slipped the ring from his finger and set it on the table beside Leora's phone. Leora exhaled, the sound soft but final. "No one here is turning against you," she said. We're just done pretending not to see you. Outside the closed door, the violin music faltered, as if the celebration itself had heard. Inside, Thessaly's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to her chest, searching for words that no longer mattered. Bram lowered his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have spoken years ago. The words hung there too late to mend, too honest to retract. The days after the wedding moved quietly, like the river behind my house, slow, certain, carrying everything it needed to forget. I spent my mornings in the garden, pruning the azaleas and coaxing the basil back to life after the heat. The world felt smaller, but easier to hold. One afternoon, the mail carrier stopped by the gate. Got something fancy for you today, Ms. Denton, he said, handing me a cream envelope sealed in deep green wax. The return address read Ames Residence, Charleston Harbor. I sat on the porch steps and opened it carefully. Inside, the handwriting was elegant, the kind that comes from someone who measures her words before she writes them. Dear Sylara, you did nothing wrong by walking away. You taught us all what grace looks like. My son will recover his pride will take longer than his heart. As for Thessaly, she is learning what silence sounds like when no one fills it for her. Please know, this your leaving told the truth louder than any confrontation ever could. Lyora Ames. I folded the letter slowly, not to keep it neat, but to let it sink in. A week later, the local paper carried a small notice between real estate listings and church announcements. The Ames Denton wedding, previously held at the Grand Magnolia Hotel, will not be continuing as planned. No explanation, just the ending of something that had never begun honestly. By then, the whispers had faded. People had moved on to other scandals, other dinners, other names. That evening, my phone buzzed once a message from Bram, 3 short lines. I wish I had spoken sooner. You didn't deserve the years of quiet. Thank you for still being her mother. I read it twice and set the phone aside. The light outside dimmed to gold, the kind that forgives the edges of everything it touches. Thessaly never called. The silence stayed, but it no longer felt cruel. It felt earned, like distance shaped into peace. The letter remained on the kitchen table, its corners curling in the soft breeze from the river. Spring arrived quietly along the river, soft enough to make the world feel forgiven. I set the small table on the patio that morning, 3 cups, 1 teapot, and an empty chair with a folded napkin laid neatly across it. The napkin carried a small card written in my hand, for lessons learned. Nora arrived first, holding a jar of marmalade. You've gone fancy on me, she teased. Setting it down beside the sugar bowl. Just morning tea, I said. It's been a while since I used the good china. Mrs. Henley from next door joined us soon after, her laugh bright as ever. We talked about the azaleas, about her grandson's new job, about anything that didn't require sympathy. That was the only rule. At one point, Nora glanced at the empty chair. You expecting someone else? No, I said. That one's for what we learned too late. The conversation softened after that. The kettle hissed faintly, birds somewhere above us testing their morning songs. I poured tea for each of them, the quiet between us warm rather than awkward. I read the notice in the paper. Mrs. Henley said gently, I hope you're doing all right. I am, I answered. Better than I was. Nora reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You walked away the right way. Sylara, not many people can say that. I smiled. Some seats you lose by force. Others you leave by choice. The sunlight shifted through the garden, catching the empty chair so it seemed touched by gold. The napkin fluttered slightly in the breeze, like a quiet acknowledgement from the past. We stayed there until the pot ran dry, and laughter returned in small, natural bursts. When they left, I gathered the cups and turned once more toward the river. The water glimmered in the late light, steady and untangled. Peace, I realized, isn't loud or certain. It's just a chair waiting by the window no longer for someone else, but for yourself.